Sew with Monty. Today we are going to start a torso block for our form. Now this block can also be made for you or a person of any size, male or female. So I'm going to address this when we talk about the male body. I'll explain to you where those measurements will be taken. But the first part of this is we're going to take all the measurements we need to build the torso block, which is the basic pattern that you can then use to build all of the other patterns from. The first measurement we're going to get is across the back. We're going to go from shoulder tip to shoulder tip. Now on a human, this is going to be the bone at the top of your shoulder, right at the ball of your shoulder. There's a bone, and you want to go straight across from bone to bone to get that measurement. On my form, this measurement is 15 inches. Okay, you want to take the back measurement preferred over the front. Remember, we're making a block here, so we don't have to be real specific with the measurements, but you want what would maybe be the larger of the two, and usually that's across the back. So across the shoulder would be your first measurement, and then the second measurement is your chest or bust. Now this is going to go right across the full part of a man's chest or the full part of a woman's body. When you do this, you want to make sure that your tape measure is nice and parallel or perpendicular to the side seam, parallel to the floor, and find your measurement. And see, on my form, I'm going to use 35.5. It's a little bit smaller than that, but I'd rather have it a little large than too small. Now, the measurements we're taking first are all the horizontal measurements, so we'll do the waist, the high hip, and the full hip. And then after we do that, we're going to go from apex to apex. So those are all the horizontal measurements. You've got the cross back shoulder width, you've got the bust or chest measurement, waist, high hip, full hip, and then across from apex to apex. So that's 6 measurements you'll need to take horizontally. Now let's talk about the vertical measurements we're going to take. So there's a point on the form and on a person that is called high point shoulder. Many measurements are taken from high point shoulder, and this would be along the shoulder line at the crook of the neck. If you have trouble finding this on a human, on the form obviously the seams show you, but on a person, have them just tilt their head toward your hand, and you'll see the indentation right there on their neck, and you'll find high point shoulder. And then from there, you want to start taking your vertical measurements. The first one is across the apex to waist, high point shoulder to waist in the front, and the same in the back. You go from high point shoulder, the same point, to the back waist. Now, if you're having trouble keeping up at this point, just take a little piece of tape and put right there and put a little dot on it, on a form or on a human, and that way you won't lose this point. So high point shoulder, front waist, high point shoulder, back waist, front waist, make sure you go across the chest or the apex to get this. Same on a male as it is a female. Okay, and then the rest of the vertical measurements is high point shoulder to the apex. So you're going to go to here and right to the apex. Now if you need to put a pin in your form to find the apex, that's going to be the pinnacle of the full part of the bust. On the man, it would be the full part of the chest on the princess seam, so you need that. On a human being, it is the apex of their body. So you want to take the high point shoulder to apex, is the second or third measurement you take, and then the last measurement is waist to the full hip line. So from the natural waist to full hip line. So you have 4 of those and 6 of the horizontal measurements. So let's go back and let's take them to the table, and I'll show you what to do with the measurements. So now we have all of our measurements, and I've made this little chart so that I don't forget any of my measurements. As you can see, I did forget one, the apex to apex, and had to write it in. So I'll update my chart and have that printed in there as well. But this is the across the back measurement. The first part is all my horizontals, chest or bust measurement, the total measurement, total waist, total high hip, and total full hip. And then apex to apex on the front of the bodice or torso. The vertical measurements are high point shoulder again, and I've just abbreviated it HPS, to front waist, back waist, and high point shoulder to apex, and then your waist to your full hip. With these measurements, you can build the torso block so that you can fine tune and make your basic block pattern from. So let's go ahead and I'll show you the beginning of how you do your actual block. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure a line here that goes from my high point shoulder, this is the vertical measurement, to the front waist. So I've gotten this measurement. I'm starting with the front here. On the fold, I'll do the back. Now I've folded my fabric because in this particular case, I'm going to make a full body torso block instead of just half. Now many times when you're draping on the form, you can just do one half of the body and then just duplicate it for the other half. But in this case, because I'm making it with the option of putting it on yourself so that you might be able to do this to your own torso, I'm going to make a full body torso block. So the first thing I have done is I've come in 2 inches here from a line that keeps me off the selvage. Now, let's talk about this first. See how the selvage is kind of rippled here? I don't want to incorporate this into my torso block because this could distort the fit of my torso. So I'm going here and I'm going to end up cutting this off, this entire selvage edge off. I still have it on here because I wanted to know that my fabric is laying vertically and my center front is parallel to the selvage because I want it to run lengthwise. The second thing about my fabric that I've done is I've pressed it with steam to try to get some of the shrinkage out of it before I start draping. So I've pressed the whole entire block. I just snipped and ripped to make sure I've got plenty of room here. What I wanted to do was incorporate high point shoulder to waist plus about 8 or 9 inches to get me to the full hip here so that my torso block will cover all my measurements that I have on my chart. So what you can do is if you have waist to full hip and high point shoulder to waist, you can take the longer of the two. Mine happened to be the front, which is 17.5, and then include your waist to full hip, which is 8.5, which was 26 inches. So you want to make sure you've got at least that and maybe an inch or two more so that your drape block is going to accommodate all your critical measurements. Okay, so now what I have done, I've drawn a line that represents the center front of my drape block. And on this line, I have put marks from this top corner. I've gone straight across, and this is half of my shoulder to shoulder, across the shoulder. So it was 15 originally, so this is 7.5, and this is the shoulder point right here. This is what this little mark represents. Making sure I kept this corner square. Very important that these stay square. Now, from here, I've come out 3 inches. This should be high point shoulder, represent high point shoulder. Now, the fuller the figure that you're working on, and this goes for male or female, this might be wider. We start with 3. This measurement is 3 from the center over here. But if you're working on a male or female figure that's fuller, you may go 3.25 or 3.5. Usually 3.5 will cover most sizes that you're working on. I wouldn't go much larger than that. You can always clip it when you start your draping. So you're going to go over 3 and you're going to come down 3. 3, 3. And then I like to take my ruler and I just keep it on this corner and I just dot in a quarter circle line, just like this. And that's going to be my drape block's neckline. Now, we want to put shoulder slope on this, and I'm going to drop down 1 inch from here. We're going to, by default, go 1 inch on our shoulder slope. Now this will be adjusted. Remember, this is just a drape block. It's not accurate yet. We just have to have a starting point. So right here will be my shoulder, and then I'm going to come down approximately 4 inches here. 4 to 5 inches. Again, depends on the size of the person. This gives me a little template that starts off my armhole. So shoulder and the beginning of the armhole. This becomes the neckline. Now, I want to come down. Here's my waist. So I've measured high point shoulder on the front to my waist, which is 17.5 inches. And then right at that point, I'm going to come across perpendicular here, and I'm going to draw a line. Now my full hip is 36.75. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do 9.25. That'll be slightly bigger, and that's 8.5 inches down. So I'm going to go 8.5 inches down, and I'm going to do 9.25 as my general block measurement here. Now this is the actual body measurements. So I'm going to come straight up through here. Now I'm building the block itself. This is a drape block, remember. It's not intended to be a fitted pattern. I'm not doing a flat pattern. I'm going to take this block and I'm going to go to the form and finish draping it on the form or the person I'm using to drape to. So at this point you can see that there's a jag here. So what I'm going to do is come down approximately 8 inches here, and I'm going to give us a little T mark, and then I'm going to just join up this line here so that this makes a very crude version of an armhole. Still haven't perfected it. We'll perfect that on the form. So you can start to kind of see this thing developing into something other than just a piece of square material. Now we're going to start placing some of the important parts of the pattern in here. So we're going to start by finding the apex from high point shoulder. So the apex from high point shoulder is 10 inches. So I'm going to come straight down 10 inches and I'm going to draw a little line here. And then I'm going to come over from the center front half of my apex to apex, which is 3.5. So this is going to give me exactly where my apex is. And that's the measurement that I'm going to build my bodice around. Now, from this measurement, I'm going to come down 1 inch below the apex, and I'm going to start drawing a line, staying square to the waist, and going down 4 inches below my waist here. So I'm going to come all the way down to here. Now this is just a beginning dart to give me a waist suppression. Remember, the waist is really full here, but I need a little waist suppression to get started. So what I'm going to do at the waistline point, I'm going to make a waist suppression of 1 inch. And then I'm going to draw a diamond which represents the dart that I need to make my waist block. And why I'm doing all this, instead of just taking a piece of fabric and going to the form, is that I'm going to be closer to what I need before I ever get to the form. I've already built things in here that's going to help me be able to drape this better. Now once I have this, I'm going to change color so I don't get confused. I'm going to draw a line to cut on. Now usually you do about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but I'm going to make a 1 inch seam allowance here, just in case I need a little wiggle room when I get to my form for draping. Okay? So, and then I'm going to come straight across here at the bottom where my 8.5 inch line was. So this will be my cut line when I'm done. Now out here I'm going to come over again 1 inch, because we're going to do something a little different when we put this block together. So the red line represents how I'm going to cut this block out. So I have an inch margin on the side seam, inch margin on the center front. I'm also going to do an inch margin up here on the shoulder, like this. And I'm going to do an inch margin around the armhole. So inch everywhere, so that when I get to my form or I put it on myself, I've got some wiggle room to work with, just in case I need a little extra and I don't have it. The only place I'm going to cut right on the line is my neckline. That has to seat, and without that being cut right on the line, it's going to be difficult to get that to seat. So I'm going to come in here, try to stay square, and I'm just going to cut it out here. So this would be my front torso block for my drape. And now we'll go on to the back. So now we're ready to do our back drape block for our torso. We can see now that we have the front cut out and marked, and I've transferred the marks to both sides so that the front and back have the same marks on them. So I have the dart. Let me put the center fold line in the dart. The center fold line is very important here, because you want to make sure that your dart starts off with a straight line and it doesn't bend, because if it starts to bend, it could cause twisting, and we want our dart to be nice and clean. So you can see I have a front and back torso block for draping. It's already got its preliminary marks on it. Now the back, we're going to put a crease down the center back here, as we have on our fabric, and then I'm going to take my back measurement from high point shoulder through the waist and then add the hip to it. So if I've got 8.5 from my full waist to my hip, and then high point shoulder from the back is 17 1/4. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw a line, 17 1/4 plus 8 1/2, which is going to be 25 3/4. So I'm going to come just below my edge up here so I have a little margin, and I want to go 25 3/4. So right here is 24, and this is my top edge here. So I need to add another 1 3/4. And this is going to be the bottom edge of my drape block. And I'm going to square off here, like that. And then I'm going to come up at the top and I'm going to draw that line straight across like I did on my front. Square from my fold line. Make sure you stay square. If you need to use a square, that's perfectly fine. Now my shoulder width, shoulder to shoulder, was 15, which is 17 1/2 or 7 1/2. So that's going to be my shoulder tip right there. Now this time we're going to do the 3 inches in the neck, and we're only going to come down 1 1/2 in the back neck. So the back neck isn't quite as low as the front neck. So this will be 1 1/2 here, 3 inches wide. Again, we come over here and we do our shoulder slope 1 inch from this point right here. And we're going to put the shoulder slope in. Again, this is just a block. There'll be draping and all the fine tuning will be done on the form or on the person. So now we have our shoulder and our neckline put in here. So we start to build the rest of our body. So we're going to come down 17 1/4 inches. This is where our waist is. And perpendicular from here, I'm going to draw in the waist. Now remember, we're working off a fold back here, so we don't have the extra material past this fold line. That's real important. But this is just reminding me where my waist is. Now in the back, we want to do the hip measurement as well. So the hip measurement on the front was 9, we went 9 1/4, so we're going to do the same on the back. Now this may be adjusted later, but again, this is a block. And that's why we add the extra inch out here. Now from this point up, I'm going to square off at 9 1/4, and I'm going to go all the way up the side here, staying square as much as I can. And then here, just like on the front, I'm going to come down square to the shoulder point 4 inches, and then I'm going to come from here down to 8 inches, and I'm going to draw the line back in. Again, this is a block. We're not worried about it being perfect. From this point, from this outside line to this inside line, I want to find the center, because this is how I'm going to develop where my dart's going to be. So if this is 9 1/4, 4 5/8 is going to be where that line's going to be. So this is going to be the center line of my dart. So we've got to draw our dart fold line in here first. This time I'm coming all the way down 5 inches below the waist. And I'm going to be 7 1/4 above, because I want to be approximately 1 inch below what I speculate will be my underarm point. When you do a dart, a long line dart like this in the back, you don't want the dart point to exceed the underarm point of your arm. Because if it gets up in here and it gets into where the armhole area is, when you reach, having that dart there causes tension and it pulls against the body. Try to keep your dart point on the back dart below the armhole area. I like to start with about 1 inch below. So here's the beginning part of my dart. And again, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put 1 inch suppression on both sides. This may change, but this is a jumping off point. We don't really know yet what's going to happen. So we've got to get started and get a general idea of where things might be. Now everything may be changed when we get on the body or the form, but at least we've got a jumping off point. Again, we're going to come around the drape and we're going to draw our red line in where we're going to cut it out. So I'm going to go 1 inch all the way down the side here so that I have a little ease. I'm going to do 1 inch in the so-called preliminary armhole area and 1 inch across here like this, and 1 inch across the shoulder. So this will be my red line cut. Again, on the neck, we cut right on the neck so that we can see exactly where we're fitting. High point shoulder is right here. So we're going to cut this out, we're going to mark the dart, and we're going to baste it together, and then we're going to take it to the form, and I'll show you how to perfect this little drape, torso drape, and turn it into a fabulous little pattern.